I'm going to bring it back to the 90s and maybe a little bit of New England and say it's wicked rad to be here. It's very nice to see so many faces involved. And Dr. O'Connell, touching on those pieces and really focusing on those pieces around stigma is really going to be a strong primary part of what we're going to be talking about today. And Denise, I think you'll be very glad that the first slide is about ethics. And I made sure to go through and find, because as Tom said, we don't know who is in the audience, so you'll be speaking to a wide group of people. It's our job to remain culturally competent. It's our job to maintain lifelong education and across the board to really challenge our own biases, yeah? So the first thing we need to do when we challenge our own biases is know the language. And part of knowing language is knowing that language is always changing. Language is always evolving. So what I am telling you right now may have changed within the 30 seconds that I've been talking. And I'm comfortable with that, and I need everybody else to be comfortable with that, okay? LGBTQIA+, a lot of us know the L and the G. There's some other pieces there, MSM, men who have sex with men. Those men may not consider themselves gay or bisexual. That's not really a point of contention or argument. Bisexual. Commonly, we would say that's a person who is attracted to both men and women. But we need to open that up a little bit more. A person who's attracted to more than one gender. A person who's attracted to their own gender and to other genders. That's staying open, being flexible. Something that's really important, I think, when we get down here is transgender, also referred to as trans. So a number of folks in this room who work within the community have heard trans. It's just a little bit easier, right? A little bit quicker. And you're going to see throughout us talking today, but what about bathrooms? How do we really explain to people that there's a toilet in there? I'm going to give you a bunch of signs. Some of them are going to be funny. Some of them are going to be like, yeah, there's a toilet. I want to help. So here's some help. The trans umbrella, transgender, is a term that is often considered to be an umbrella term. AFAB and AMAB, I think historically we've said born a man, born a woman. That's kind of an assignment, right? And I think it's important, too, that we just say really quick, like genitals, because that's going to come up in conversation. That comes up in conversation frequently from other people outside of the trans community. So it's really important that we just kind of say it now, right? Thank you, I heard that. I really appreciate that. So it's really important that we start saying that now. So people are not born as, people are labeled, assigned. M to F, male to female, F to M, female to male. The reason that's important is somebody who was assigned female at birth, right? They are F to M, they are female to male. That is a trans male, trans man. And one of the reasons why this is so important is because when we are developing positive relationships with our clients, we must know the appropriate language, right? That's part of our ethics. That's part of our cultural competency. Latinx, really delightful. It's the removal of the A and the O, keeps things neutral. Mix. I've frequently heard people say, well, I don't know how to pronounce it, so I just don't use it. Mix. Really easy. Two-spirit. The reason this is up there is I think a lot of folks are using the term two-spirit. That is an indigenous term. And I think we really need to honor that as white folks who are not indigenous. That is a term for third gender, multiple genders, and then cisgender, people who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And I do want to go back just a moment to non-binary. When we talk about the binary, we're talking about one or the other, right? We've got this, we've got this. Non-binary might be a person who is fluid and floats in between. A person who doesn't relate to any of it. It's non-binary. I'm really fond of this, not just because I made it. How many folks have heard of the genderbread person? Some recognition? I want to ask people to consider maybe using, there's a gender unicorn. That one's a really nice one. It's a little mystifying at times because I'm a person, not a unicorn, although they're delightful. And redheads with blue eyes, I think, are like 1 or 2% of the population. So technically, I am a unicorn. Thank you very much. You are unicorns as well. But the gender-bred person was taken from a trans person who designed it. So I want to ask people to invite people to maybe not use that if they can possibly. But this one, I pulled this up there, and I use this one because earlier when I had said the word genitals, a couple of people squirmed. And now I'm going to change it even a little bit more and call bits and pieces, right? So when somebody is born, we use bits and pieces to say what they are, right? So there's a little bit more squirming. That makes me happy. I appreciate that. I think, therefore, I am. I think we have a couple of counselors. I recognize some faces in here. We have some counselors, some intervention folks. I see some nodding. We work with people usually about 6 hours. Takes some hours to write our notes, right? 6 to 7 hours a day, we work with people to help them be who they are. I think, therefore, I am. We work with people to help them say, I am having a great day. Therefore, I am having a great day. And yet we struggle when people say, I am a man. Therefore, I am a man. And we say, well, let's hold off on that and let's focus on something else right now. Let's talk about your depression, or let's talk about the substance you might be using at this time. And then gender expression is how we present ourselves. My gender is moderately awkward, somewhat matching attempts, right? So that's how I'm expressing myself today. Gender non-conforming. I really like talking about this because this also makes people wildly uncomfortable. How many people in this room identify as women and are wearing pants? Okay. I'm very sorry, but approximately 50 years ago, you were all gender non-conforming, right? And we have such a hard time with this. It's just being comfortable. Sometimes it's being fabulous. Sometimes it's just really hot outside and pants are uncomfortable, so a skirt or a dress or something flowing is better. And the reason we're going over some of these pieces is because people who are in the spectrum of transgender are less likely to seek assistance, counseling, or mental health services because of how we, and I am a counselor, how we focus on gender so much, and that's not always what's going on. Or we might be using really insulting language, and that's not helpful. I also really like this because there's a unicorn on it. So like, I may or may not like unicorns. I want to go over language really quickly. I think it's really important to recognize that grammar and like kind of grammar policing is a little gross sometimes. So I don't want to get too focused on that, the whoms and the whos. I do want to say historically, Kate Bornstein writes a book, great book, and in her book, or their book, depending, the word transgendered. That person is transgendered, is in the book. That was okay. Remember, we're evolving. It is no longer okay. Right? To help, and I'm going to use the word queer, and I don't use that as an insult. Hopefully nobody in here is named David. If you are, I'm very sorry. Because our tone can dictate an insult, right? So my tone is David. Moderate insult, David. That's like not a good, right? David is obviously not a good word. Queer, same thing. I think that's a little bit tougher. I'm in my early 40s, so I straddle the line where queer is a really bad word, and it's also like wicked cool. So evolution. So if I take ED and put it on the end of queer and say, yeah, my uncle's queered. He went to the bar. He's queering with his friends. Right? That doesn't work. So think about that when you hear the word transgender. People are not transgenders. Again, it's all about our tone, and just putting that S on there doesn't work. Sex change, sex reassignment, gender reassignment, not super. Gender confirmation surgery. When we say sex change or genital reassignment, we're focusing right on the genitals. That's a super, like, that's awkward, right? Should we all like say hello to each other very much like our canine companions? No. So stop focusing on genitals. Second, not all people want surgery. That's our own baggage. That's our own bias. And we talked about that when we tapped in to the ethics statement. That's our own bias that certain body parts belong to certain groups of people. And that's a tricky one. That is a tough one to kind of challenge in our heads, and we need to. And for some folks, getting surgery is extremely necessary. So I want to tap in a little bit to some numbers around stop and frisk. Folks are familiar with this concept, stop and frisk? Walking up, officer can walk to person and say, I need you to stop, I'm going to frisk you now. In New York City in 2011, there were 636,000 plus or minus people who were stop and frisked. 84% of those people were people of color. FYI, only 2% of contraband was ever found at all. Now, I am also not native to the Richmond area, and I have been accused of being a Yankee. So I will take it to a Virginia city. In 2017 of this city, there were 125 stop and frisk. 91 of those people were people of Black or African American descent. That's a really unreasonable amount, right? So when we talk about surgeries, and let's talk about this, what happens if somebody stops me and frisks me, and I do have something they think I shouldn't have, or I don't have something they think I should have? Surgery now has become a necessity in my life, right? Surgery is wildly expensive. Some insurances do cover surgeries. How do most of us get health insurance? Jobs? Jobs? This is an at-will state, and trans and gender non-conforming persons are really struggling to find jobs right now. It's really important we keep this in mind. It's also really important that when you sit down with a person, when you start having those counseling sessions, that the first question out of your mouth isn't, so how far have you gone with everything? Because that question happens. So the people who are in this room, who are listening to this conversation, I'm going to say that most of the people in this room are like, what? This is part of, as Dr. O'Connell was saying, hearing colleagues and coworkers use these kind of words that was like, oh, I'm not going to tell that person about my life. There's a whole community of people that really needs the people in this room to really respond and say, that's not really what we say anymore. I watched this really great talk with this guy, Ari. And really have these open conversations, those honest conversations that Dr. O'Connell was referencing. Again, I want to tap on terminology again. Transsexual. What's really wonderful, I think, about counseling, and of the counselors that are in this room, what's really wonderful is the it depends answer. Love the it depends answer. The word transsexual. You will see, so again, I'm in my early 40s and I'm straddling that line of language change. Transsexual, for some folks who might be a little bit older than me, is a really affirming statement. It's really validating for some of the processes. For some folks who are a little bit younger than me, it's a really offensive statement. And that word sexual in the middle of it is like, oofa, right? So just ask a person, oh, what's the word you use? That's okay. It's not, what are you? So what do you do with yourself? Right? And I see a couple people smiling, so that makes me feel a little bit better that that's not too much of a poke. I really wanted to put hashtag not all trans people, but I wasn't sure. Wish I had. Dr. O'Connell used that. Not all people who are trans identify as LGBTQIA. Not all people who are trans say that they're gay or that they're queer. So we need to not make assumptions. And the APA even came out with it, I think, in 2015, reminding us that non-professional and professional folks were interweaving these things. And part of that is around lack of knowledge and discomfort. And we know that when we have discomfort or lack of knowledge, we're less likely to talk about it. Here's some pronouns. One of my more favorite bathroom signs. Really enjoy that. I will touch on they. There's so many folks who say they is not a singular word, and yet we all use they singularly. When we're driving down the street, someone cuts us off, and we say they drive like a ding-dong. Someone left their cell phone here. It's one cell phone. Someone left their umbrella here. It's one umbrella. There's one handle. It's one person. The Oxford Dictionary has it dated back to the 1300s. They can be singular. Also, why are we arguing with people about who they are, right? I love your eyebrows when you give me the like knowing, Love it, thank you. And then I want to touch on the isms real quick. So I know we're here, we're talking about substance use, we're talking about recovery, we're talking about early intervention. And these isms are all part of what we're seeing and what we're experiencing as a collective community of peoples. I do this when I do my intakes. I have a steady stream. Hi, my name's Ari, my pronouns are he, him, they, them. What's your name and pronouns? I have absolutely gotten some weird looks from people. That's okay. It's my job kind of to be uncomfortable, right? Sex versus gender. So on your intake forms, we start talking about affirming treatment and knowledgeable treatment. So there's a difference between affirming and knowledgeable. Affirming means I can walk in and you're not going to deny me service. That's like what's being settled for, right? And then there's knowledgeable service. So for folks who take insurance, there's certain things that have to be on the forms, right? Well, you can also put another piece on the form, sex and gender. Well, I can't call that person by their name because that's not what's on their ID. Really? Because you're calling Charlie Chuck. So let's be a little bit more flexible. Let's be a little bit more open. Pronouns. These are not preferred pronouns. Let's change that. It is not a preferred pronoun. Remember 1992-ish when, I think it was called sexual preference. Do you remember that? And we stopped doing that because it's not a preference. Can we stop doing that with pronouns, please? It's that quiet dig. That's affirming, but it's not knowledgeable. That's very quiet. I see you and then partner versus wife and husband. So I want to encourage people to start tapping in. And this is where I get a little unsure, right? So the intersectional feminist in me is like, but it's really important to say woman CEO. Right? It's really important to say, oh, the two moms. That's really important. The two dads. Because I really want to acknowledge, so I need to like name things. Okay, and when you're meeting a new client, do you have a partner? Are you partnered? Because we also need to understand polyamorous relationships. Because there's people coming in to seek services that come from all different levels of relationships. All different sexualities, all different genders. And all I want is for you to live a good life and for you to have a good time. My name is, pronouns are, even mermaids need to poo. Try using these words, though, a firefighter, even if it's just for yourself, the news anchor on the television. Right? Let's take those gender pieces out. This is a tough one as well for me because I don't want to encourage you to misgender somebody. However, if I'm going to follow Dr. Hayes and talk about acceptance and commitment, well, let's just accept it. You are going to misgender someone, period. You do not have to raise your hands. And how many people in this room have had somebody bump into them, call them by the wrong name, touch them without permission, and when they're like, oh, excuse me, right? Just been a ding-dong. And then when they apologized, they made their apology about themselves. I'm so sorry, it's just you were in my way, so like I moved you, right? Don't do that when you misgender somebody. That is for you to sit with. That is for you to evaluate. That is for you to check your bias, right? That was our first slide about ethics, to check our own biases. That's when you get to say, I'm really sorry I did that, next time I'll do better. And then continue. If it is relationship building time, maybe it's appropriate therapeutically to say, how was that for you? How's our relationship now? Maybe you're going to be doing some empowerment work at that point, right? Where a person gets to say, you know, the fact that you did this really offended me. I'm really glad you're checking in with me. Please don't do that again. That feels good. How often, when you get called the wrong name or the wrong gender, do you get to speak for yourself to the person who did it? And have it be mutual, right? We talk about our termination appointments when we end our services with the clients with whom we work. And there's something horrible, because, you know, sad, But there's also something really delightful about that, because how many relationships in our life do we have that end joyfully? It's very small. It sets a really nice example when we can end a relationship joyfully and on praise. It's the same thing when you say, I'm sorry, next time I'll do better. If there is the opportunity to follow that up with, how is that for you? How are we doing? Right? Misconceptions, assumptions, that leads to, there was a study done, I think, in the early 2000s with cisgender women. Cisgender means identify with how you were assigned at birth, right? Oh, nobody told you I was going to do quizzes in the middle, did they? Cisgender women who were lesbian or bisexual, and how they did not talk to their doctors openly because their doctors assumed that they were heterosexual. We've got to have these conversations. And remember that not all sex is for making babies, because that's still there. Again, Dr. O'Connell, super glad I was here to hear you, because I'm like, yes. When we talk about, that faith base and how that's really ingrained in some of our westernized thinking. Sex is for making babies. We don't talk about pleasure. But we talk about pleasure when we're talking about drugs. We need to ask these questions. We need to talk about it. And then leads to a lack of trust and hesitancy. So according to the Trans Survey 2015, Virginia did this really awesome thing in 2003, doing a trans survey, one of the first ones that were done. 2015, there was a national trans survey. These are the numbers for Virginia from that. And then there's another survey ongoing. Ted Heck over at VDH does really great work. And I really encourage folks. VDH has some really, and I'm not saying this about Virginia. I am saying it's really surprising that we have these numbers and these answers coming out, and yet there's a lack of evidence and data. But the numbers are there. So the question here, we did better. Virginia did better than California and New York, because we all think, right, California and New York, that's a place to be if you're like going through the thing. Virginia did better in receiving, appropriate care and respect, but Virginia did worse in people actually seeking services. So did we do better because people didn't go to the doctor? Right? So I want to encourage people, always keep that third eye open. And then I also want to point out having to teach the provider about care. So there's two things there. One, thank you all for being here, and thank you all for not saying transgender. I'm not going to go sit and talk in that. I'm going to go for a walk, and then I'll come back for the panel, even though I know your CEUs depend on it. But thank you for being here and listening, because I see people's eyes open. I see people nodding. I appreciate that. That's really important, because now you have a little bit more information. And I know we don't want to rely on the Tumblrverse or the Instaverse, and some of that is really important, because it is not okay to ask our clients to tell us about, your transgenderism. Thank you. I don't know who did that noise. I really appreciate that noise, though. We need to learn about this. There are a number of people. Trans Bodies, Trans Lives is a great book, and it's written by trans people. By trans people with all the letters after their names. And it's got employment, medicine, jobs, law. It's great. It is a wonderful book. I have no financial responsibility with that book at all. So I'm not getting anything here. There's also a great book, Theorizing Transgender Practice for Clinical Interventions, I think. That's a new book, just came out. Really great theories. I encourage folks to read that. Bring it into your book group. No? It makes people not want to go to the doctor. So I'm not going to ask people to raise their hands, but I think that I will get a little bit of an agreement here of how many women in this room have had to explain their bodies to their doctors. So what is affirming treatment? See, I didn't raise hands, I didn't ask for anything, but those are some pieces there, right? So what is affirming treatment? It includes knowing civil rights history of the LGBTQIA community. And it's really important to also know some of the misrepresentations that are coming out. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into the use conversation. So see, we got to build up from the foundation, right? Knowing some of the civil rights history, Stonewall. Folks know that word, right? Stonewall. The 50th anniversary is this summer. They're also having World Pride in New York City. It's going to be like amazing. Stonewall, even though the movie showed a young, white, gay, cisgender man from the Midwest who came to the Northeast and went to New York City, which sounds like just about all of our assessments, it was started by 3 trans women of color, and I think that you all need to know their names. It is Marsha P. Johnson. The P stands for pay it no mind, what she told the judge when she was in court. Sylvia Riviera, and Ms. Majors. And Ms. Majors is still alive and still doing the work. Now, when that happened, it happened because the cops went in, they arrested people because they weren't wearing the right clothes, right? We know those stories, yes, mostly. 3 years prior to that was Compton's Corner in San Francisco. And that was a luncheonette where the people there would not serve the women that came in to eat. And that was trans women of color who initiated the San Francisco riots. So it's really important that we know this history. We talk a little bit about understanding the isms, the stigmas. When you stack those layers of marginalization, there's absolutely ageism, racism, ableism. You need to know that when you're talking to your clients, because as we talk a little bit more about suffering, we see contributing factors to use. We talked about gender-affirming treatment. We know that well-being improves when people are seen. I really usually at the end of that say, do I really need to cite this? But I figure if you see you, I'm going to cite it. Use. So there's lacking evidence. So we just talked a little bit about some of the surveys that are out. We know that emergency rooms are very uncomfortable to ask questions sometimes about sexuality and gender. We know that funding will be removed from certain organizations or agencies when people ask about sexuality or gender. And we know that some organizations can't carry condoms visibly because funding will be removed. Yes, that one right there, those eyebrows. That's the one for that one. So we don't have the accurate information around what is contributing to use. So a lot of times as providers, well, yeah, that transgenderness, also please don't say transgenderness, must be really hard. And so we focus on that. And that's not always the focus. That's not always the contributing factor. What we do know from a 2003 study that was turned into a report in 2015, 12 years later, the interwebs later, that transgender men report using cannabis and illicit drugs more. So how many people have been sold and told that trans women use drugs more than trans men? Because that's the data. That's the clearest data that's come out. Trans women report higher uses of alcohol. Gender minority stress does show up with discrimination, societal, and familial rejection. Shame, lack of value, and a belief and knowledge of likely prejudice. So I don't go to the doctor because I'm afraid somebody's going to treat me poorly. So I just didn't go to the doctor. I didn't find out. I just didn't go. I didn't go get substance use treatment because I was afraid I wasn't going to be treated very well. When the person who was there and the people showed up and said, hey, we're here to bring you to recovery, and the other person said, can I go? They didn't go seek that service. Maybe they didn't think it was available to them. They didn't meet the criteria. They weren't on the overdose registry. The likely concern or thought. We're also sold something as researchers or as writers, as therapists, and I want to really draw attention to, there's this idea or story going around based on, I think it was a 2015 study of LGBT murders where trans women of color have a life expectancy of 31 to 34. That's not true. In that report, which was all of the Americas, North, Central, and South, there was no separation by race. There was no separation by SES. And it happened that the women that were killed were ages 31 to 35 predominantly. So that's a really big assumption for anybody in here who looks at those reports, who studies those reports. It's a really big and dangerous assumption. Because what happens when we start telling people they don't have a future? I love the nod, by the way. I love all this action. What happens? People stop planning for their future. There's no hope. And I'm not going to get to have this delayed gratification, so I'm going to get this immediate gratification. And we know that from learning about the ACEs. So yeah, it's scary. Violence against people who are trans, particularly against transgender women, particularly against transgender women of color, is really astronomical and concerning. And there's a life out there, and we got to stop telling people that they don't have chance and they don't have life. So now when we talk about substance abuse treatment, everything's kind of coming together a little bit more with that little foundational basic language primer, working our way up. SAMHSA in 2001, it's 2019, SAMHSA in 2001 put this out. Now there were some language pieces that I did kind of like change a little bit. The one that I did change is, because I want to be fully transparent, because we're talking about trans stuff, very clear that they did say a person who identifies as a female and himself. Okay, so I changed that. I took out the himself because we're spending 45 minutes to an hour talking about something. I don't want to put that up there and just kind of traipse all over everything I just said. But here, this one's really important. Don't let your clients be victims or subject to sexual or physical harassment. We had to be told this. So that same thing, when we hear our coworkers saying something, when we hear a joke going on, when we hear, it's our job. Part of being counselors is, as my partner frequently says, I carry the flag often, is carrying a flag. And we're teachers, right? That's what we do. Not only do we teach the people with whom we work, we're teaching the people in our life. It's that ripple effect. And I just want to ask people to be really aware of that and cognizant of that. Everybody get a good look? You can also go to SAMHSA and pull it down. All right. Maslow, not everything's about gender. It's not. People in the community, and when I say community right now I'm not saying LGBTQIA plus community. I am saying people in the community need jobs and they need housing. Housing, food, water, warmth, and rest. If somebody has to work 3 jobs and they work for 48 hours straight and they get 12 hours off, it makes sense that there might be a little bit of speed in their life. And it makes sense that there might be a little sleep medication in their life. People need jobs. And they need jobs where they're going to be seen and where they can use the bathroom. What happens if you can't use the bathroom in public? You can't go to work and you can't go to school. Laverne Cox talks about it really well of like, we're being kept inside our houses. I heard that. That was great too. All y'all, I love it. It's Maslow. We're talking about coping mechanisms. We're talking about growth. Dr. Turplin last year quoted pain management and the opioid epidemic. And this is going to be the one thing I read because I don't want to make a mistake. That researchers agree that such structural factors as a lack of economic opportunity, poor working conditions, and eroded social capital in depressed communities accompanied by hopelessness and despair are root causes of the misuse of opioids and other substances. There. Prevention and intervention. Depressed communities and hopelessness. We need some vocational training. We need support, and that comes from knowing the correct language and being open to understanding that everything I just told you might be wrong in 6 months, and that's okay because we get to learn. It's continual learning. It's in our ethics. And what we do know is that motivational interviewing, how many people have heard motivational interviewing more than 4 times today? Yeah? Motivational interviewing works. That works as an intervention. And MI is built on strength base. So there's a number of people in this room right now who are tired and really are done, just kind of participating. And I really appreciate all y'all for still sitting there and keeping your head up. And that is called persistence. You are persisting. How many people remember we warned her and nonetheless she persisted? Oof, that felt good, right? How many people are persisting and had to drive to Richmond this morning, which, FYI, that whole 95-64 thing, I struggle still. And yet we persist. How many people have to stand up to somebody daily? How many people, don't raise your hands, are nervous going into a bathroom and yet still go into a bathroom? That is courage. FYI, we shouldn't have to be nervous going into a bathroom. And that goes across so many different spectrums of why we might be nervous walking into a bathroom. That's courage. We're utilizing courage. How many people in this room, this is their first substance prevention, intervention, gathering and conference, and are learning something and are taking something back to the people with whom they work? That's wisdom and knowledge. That's lifelong learning. Now, how many people feel a little bit better about sitting through today? Maybe have a little tingle here, maybe a little warm in the jaw. That is a physical response of feeling good. We can share that with our clients. And again, I'm going to reference Dr. O'Connell once more. The client who does show up, who had a really hard time getting there and does show up, that is dedication. That's recovery. And it's really hard to do that when maybe you got to walk through a reception area or a waiting area where you don't feel good about yourself so that you can see that person and talk to them. That is persistence. That is courage. And when you say that to the people with whom you're working and you're honest and you're earnest, man, that feels good. And it feels good as a provider. So when we talk about intervention, strength-based, that is the most recognized, evidence-based, peer-reviewed articles are supporting, strength-based. We got to build and support so that if we do have a slip, okay, so that's one time out of the last 6 months versus every day for the 6 months before that. Talk about harm reduction. That's killing it. That's like hundreds of % better, right? Building people up, supporting people, strength-based, character strengths, motivational interviewing. That is the support of day-to-day and moving through. Thank you all for listening, and I really appreciate it.